Darkness is just setting on the landscape as I drive up a winding road to deliver a bunch of Thai food to someone in a nice neighborhood. I have the 2 front windows down, enjoying the cool night air. I've delivered up here many times before, so I know the area pretty well. A lot of the houses are propped on the hillside, overlooking the city below. Most of them are worth well over $1 million, which is why the 2 people walking down the road catch my attention. Not only are the roads dangerous to walk on because of all the turns, but there's no sidewalk either. And I've never seen anyone on foot in this neighborhood. Not unless it's someone checking the mail or bringing their trash barrel up the driveway. My GPS tells me that the house is just on the left, so I slow down and swing in. The people, a man and a woman, if I'm seeing right, are heading down the road toward me, walking along the edge of a wooded area between houses. I glance at them but don't think much else of it as I bring the several bags of food up to the house. The lady answers the door and takes the stuff, smiling politely. I smile back, telepathically telling her that she should give me a fat tip. The whole thing takes about a minute. With that done, I head back to my car, glancing around for the man and woman. I don't see them. It's dark and my back windows are tinted, so I don't notice anything wrong until I sit in the driver's seat and see a pair of crazed eyes staring at me in the rearview mirror. I start to spin around in my seat to verify that I'm not seeing things. But before I can get all the way around, the man says, "Turn around and face front." He sounds raspy and weak, like he's on his last legs, but I do what he says because he also sounds a little nuts. And as soon as I look into the rearview mirror again, I'm glad I listened to him because he's holding a big hunting knife up for me to see. Shifting my head, I also see that the woman is in the back seat as well. Our eyes meet. She looks petrified. I can see her shaking in the mirror, and I can also see that she's young. She's still in her teens. The man leans forward, and I feel the blade press against my neck directly under my right ear. "Drive," he says. I'm afraid talking will cause him to cut me, whether intentionally or not, so I don't speak. Instead, I start the car and reverse out of the driveway. We start down the winding road. I drive slowly, afraid a bump will open my neck up. After a moment, the guy says, "Drive normal." I swallow and get up to the posted speed limit. As we're getting to the bottom of the mountain, I finally risk a question. "Where do you want me to take you?" He's thinking about this as we approach an intersection with a red light. "Turn left," he says. I get into the left turn lane and look at him in the mirror. Then I see something that makes my eyes bulge. There's a cop car coming up behind us. The guy sees my eyes go wide and turns to look over his shoulder, nicking me with the knife as he does it. I wince, feeling the blood welling up and dripping slowly down my neck. "Just be f***ing cool," the guy says, taking the knife away from my neck and putting it up to the girl's. She yelps in fear. "I'll slit her throat if you do anything stupid. Then I'll jam this blade into your ear. I'm fast enough to do it." I nod once, still watching the cop. It's soon clear that the cruiser isn't going to turn left, but that means it's going to stay in the right lane, which means it will stop directly beside us. The guy in the back seems to realize this at the same time I do. "Roll up your window," he says. "The right window." He's thinking about the blood on my neck, if the cop sees it. But it's too late now anyway. The cruiser is pulling up next to us. "It'll draw their attention if I do it now," I say. "Just don't f***ing move," he whispers. I stare dead ahead, trying to see if the cop is looking this way, using only my peripheral vision. "Don't you do it, pig," the guy says in back. "Don't you f***ing do it." I can feel the blood sliding down toward my shirt collar. I wonder if it's noticeable in the backsplash from my dashboard. The smell in the car is that of fear, sweat, and fresh urine. I think the girl has let her bladder go. I don't blame her. I see movement out of the corner of my eye, but stay perfectly still. Then the cop speaks.
"Hey, you're bleeding,"
he says. Unsure what else to do, I turn my head to tell him some bullshit story and how I cut myself. But as I do, I hear the sound of a sharp blade slicing through meat. The girl's blood splashes against my face as the guy opens her throat. Knowing he aims to make good on his threat, I throw myself against the steering wheel just as he moves the blade toward me. I feel the tip of it slice through my shirt and into my back, opening me up. As he pulls it back again to get ready for another slice, I reach down with my left hand and yank on the seat back release lever, throwing myself into the seat back and sending it flying toward him. The blade sinks into the seat back from the other side as it comes down, but then the hilt is pressed against his leg, making it impossible for him to get it out again. The girl flails beside him, one hand to her wound while the other reaches for the man's face. I realize she's trying to claw his eyes out. I throw my car in park and then open the door, launching myself out and landing halfway in the oncoming traffic lane. A car comes to a screeching halt, about a foot from running me over. Inside the car, the man screams. The sound of a gunshot gets me to my feet again. I look over my car to see the cop standing at my passenger side window, his gun pointed into the vehicle at an angle. I lean down and look inside, seeing the two dead people in my back seat. One of them killed by a bullet, the other by a knife wound. It doesn't take the cops long to find out that it was a kidnapping gone wrong. The girl was some guy's rich daughter. The kidnapper was some strung-out addict whose car wouldn't start after he broke into the girl's house and forced her out at knife point. Me? I was just a delivery driver in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now I'm a delivery driver with over 40 stitches in his back and a massive car cleaning bill. When I first heard the screams from the kitchen, I was sure it was a joke. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know how crazy things can get in the kitchen. People are always messing with each other, arguing, yelling, or just being really weird to make their coworkers laugh. After the screams, I looked up from my seat in the delivery driver pickup area and soon went back to messing around on my phone. It was late on a Friday night, and I was at a local chain restaurant waiting for a delivery order. I worked for DoorDash at the time while I went through school. The dining area of the restaurant was pretty dead, with only 2 tables occupied, and the people at them were mostly just chatting and drinking. I was sitting near the kitchen in one of the 3 chairs next to the side entrance. I'd picked up from this restaurant many times before, so I knew the deal. Usually, there were 2 or 3 dashers waiting for food, but this night, it was just me. The scream had clearly come from the kitchen. It was a man's scream, I was pretty sure, but high-pitched. That was kind of why I thought it was a joke. I looked at the flimsy swinging doors to the kitchen on my left, but didn't see anything. That was when I put my attention back on my phone. Then the sound of raised voices came from the kitchen. It sounded like people were getting riled up back there. I looked out into the dining area, front of house, they call it, and saw the people at the tables looking back toward the kitchen, even though they couldn't see the doors from where they were. When I turned my head the other way, I saw movement through the little square windows on the kitchen doors. It looked like 2 people moved past the doors quickly, but it was hard to tell. It was really just a blur. Then I heard a man shout, "No!" There was a couple of inches of clearance at the bottom of the doors, and I could see shadows moving through the crack, as though someone was moving back and forth, shaking violently. After a moment, the shadows stopped moving, and there was a thud. There was movement, and I looked up at the window in the left-hand door, seeing a face staring out at me. I immediately knew something was wrong with the guy. His eyes were too wide, and he had a massive grin on his face, but his teeth weren't white. They were red with blood. His skin was bright pink and bubbly. I thought at first that he was wearing a mask, but then I realized he'd suffered 3rd-degree burns all over his face. I sat there petrified as the guy stared at me. I don't know how much time passed, but it seemed like a full minute. When I was sure he was going to push through the door and come toward me, he suddenly looked down at his feet. I followed his gaze, peering at the crack between the bottom of the door and the kitchen's white tile floor, and I saw what he was looking at. There was an expanding pool of blood there, and it had gotten on his shoes. He sidestepped over to the other window and started staring at me again for a few seconds before he shrieked, making me jump. I ran over to the people in the dining area, waving my arms.
Get out of here!
I said.
We gotta go!
The people were confused at first, but as I got closer, their faces contorted with fear.
Run!
One man shouted, pointing over my shoulder. Turning, I saw the man with the burned face just 2 steps behind me, a huge, bloody knife held in one fist. He sliced out at me with the knife, which I barely dodged by jerking my upper body back. As I scrambled away from him, backpedaling, I tripped over a chair and fell to the floor. The man with the knife loomed over me, still wearing that awful grin even though he must have been in tremendous pain. He raised the knife and swung it down at me. I could do nothing but put my hands up so he wouldn't cut my face. But before his blade reached me, a chair slammed into him, knocking the knife out of his hand and sending him stumbling back. One of the patrons had thrown it at him, and another one came and grabbed me up. We all ran out of the restaurant together, looking over our shoulders to see if the crazed employee would come out. But he didn't. The police showed up not long after that. One of the employees, who had run out the back of the restaurant when the guy went crazy, had called the cops. The police arrested the guy, but the 2 people he stabbed in the kitchen died from their wounds. I heard later that the man stuck his own face in a vat of boiling oil before stabbing the 2 guys in the kitchen. Apparently, there wasn't any sign that the guy was close to snapping. He wasn't getting fired. He had never acted crazy before. There hadn't even been a simple disagreement before it happened. He just grabbed a knife, stuck his face in a vat of hot oil, and then started killing his coworkers. He just snapped. Just like that. I directed my big brown box truck up the driveway, branches scraping along the top and sides as I went. It was 2 days after Prime Day, so I was out late delivering packages well after dark, and the house at the end of the driveway was my least favorite stop. Pretty much every single time I delivered to them, which was several times a week usually, I heard screaming and shouting coming from the old mansion. The place was tucked back on a wooded property a good half-mile from the road. I could tell that it had been a nice place at one time, but it certainly wasn't anymore. The entire front yard was choked with old cars in various states of disrepair, along with decrepit washing machines, dead dryers, broken plumbing fixtures, and 1,000 other pieces of garbage that had been tossed there. Walking up the cluttered stone steps to the door was always an exercise in agility. I tried my best not to trip and break my neck, especially at night. As I rounded the final bend in the driveway, headlights sweeping over the maze of junk in the yard, I thought I saw movement behind a couple of discarded appliances. Just a quick blur, like a large animal fleeing, or someone ducking down to hide. I didn't think much of it, having seen deer and raccoons among the debris many times, apparently drawn there by food scraps. There was just enough room at the end of the driveway for me to turn around. We were always supposed to turn around before delivering at a stop instead of after, so that's what I did. Once I had the truck positioned facing out, I shut off the engine and opened up the door to the cargo area. I only had about 20 stops to go, so finding the package wasn't hard. As I shut the door and stepped out of the vehicle, I realized there was no screaming coming from the house. Even at almost 10 o'clock at night, this was a rarity. I'd been delivering to the 2 men who lived in the house for the better part of a year. They both had the same last name and looked very similar, so I figured they were brothers. One was Timothy, and the other was Martin. Heading up the stairs to the front door, I kept my eyes on my feet so I wouldn't trip on anything. At the top of the stairs, I set the box down and pulled out my scanner. As I scanned the barcode, I noticed that the front door was open a crack. Something moved out in the yard, thumping against a metal appliance. I spun around, looking out at the dark shapes on both sides of the driveway. With my truck's headlights off, I couldn't see much of anything. Shaking my head, I pressed a couple of buttons on my scanner to complete the delivery, then started the treacherous journey down the stairs. There were soda bottles, action figures, loose nails, and even marbles on the stairs, like they wanted people to trip and fall. I made it to the bottom safely and moved up the driver's side of the truck, jumping into the seat before I saw the person sitting in the jump seat on the other side. Launching myself out of the truck, I turned around and looked inside, my pulse thrumming. It was one of the brothers, Martin. He hadn't moved at all, but he looked wrong. He was kind of bloody around the ears and the forehead, but he didn't seem to be actively bleeding. It was almost as if he had superficial cuts along his hairline. It was so dark, I couldn't see clearly.
Martin?
I said.
You okay?
He didn't answer. His eyes were closed. Looking around the yard, I felt like I was being watched. Moving around the truck, I came to the passenger side. The door stayed open while I was delivering, so I was able to go right up to him. I stuck my hand out and touched his shoulder. He slumped down, falling off the seat and into the footwell. Acting on reflex, I reached forward and caught him before he fell all the way out of the truck. He was still warm, so I didn't think he was dead. I got him out of the truck and laid him on the driveway before kneeling next to him and pulling out my phone. I reached under his chin to feel for a pulse, and that's when the skin on his face shifted with a wet, sucking sound. I pulled my hand away just as the man sat up, like he was yanked on a string. He reached up and grabbed his face, pulling it off completely. With a jolt of terror, I realized it was the other brother, Timothy. He'd been wearing Martin's face. As he pulled the skin off his own face, he revealed wild eyes and a sickly grin. He cocked his head sideways as he looked at me, then belted out shrieking laughter. I bolted away from him, straight into the yard. I ran down the side of the driveway, dodging around all the junk. But when I came to the place where I thought I'd seen movement earlier, I tripped over something. My phone flew out of my hands as I hit the ground. Looking back, I saw that I had tripped over Martin. Not only was the skin of his face gone, but the skin of his entire upper body was in the process of being removed. My stomach revolted, and I puked, even as I was getting up to run again. After making it a few feet, I came to my senses, ducking down behind the shell of an old Camaro. I looked and listened, but there was no sign of the crazed man. I peered at my truck, knowing it was my best bet for getting to safety. If I could just get to it, I could start it up in a matter of seconds and be on my way. It was better than running the half mile to the road. I'd been working for nearly 10 hours, and my legs were heavy with fatigue. I couldn't make it to the road without the truck, but I could put everything I had into a mad dash to the vehicle. Taking a deep breath, I bolted from my hiding place, running straight down the driveway, feeling like an Olympic sprinter. I heard Timothy's shrieking laughter nearby as I threw myself into the truck. 4 seconds later, I jammed down on the gas pedal and lurched down the road. Up ahead, Timothy darted out onto the driveway, knife in hand. He laughed, probably thinking I would stop. At the last moment, he dove to the left, but I was ready for it. I jerked the wheel that way, smashing him against the very same Camaro I hid behind. As the truck continued on, he was dragged along between the two vehicles before he fell. My back left tire bumped over him as I pulled the truck back onto the driveway. When I got to the road, I turned and went down to the nearest house. I'd lost my phone when I tripped over Martin, so I had to wake someone to have them call the police. As I got out of the truck, I walked down the side, seeing the damage I'd done. There were dents and scrapes all along the side of the vehicle, but no blood. As I moved down past the rear wheel, a hand shot out from under the truck and grabbed my ankle. I tried to run away, but he wouldn't let go. I tripped and fell. The last thing I saw was his insane grin and the glint of his knife in the moonlight. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.